Not because that I can't think of anything great about marriage, but because a lot of you guys aren't married, and I didn't want to stand here and be like, it's amazing, and you're all missing out, and yeah, because I don't really think that's an accurate representation of what it's like at all. So I just want to be really honest and like come from the Bible, and but if you have any questions at the end, like come and ask me. Right, so what I'm going to do to start is I'm just going to recap a little bit of the history of marriage, because I found it a little bit complicated looking at the Bible to try and find people that weren't like having multiple wives or stuff like that. So I'm just going to do a quick history of marriage, and then we're going to break into groups and discuss for a little bit, and then I'll talk a little bit more. So the dictionary definition of marriage is that it's a noun, and it is the formal union of a man and a woman typically recognised by law, by which they become husband and a wife. But I don't really think that does it justice. So I think the best thing to do is go back to the beginning, Genesis. So to paraphrase it, because it's quite long, God has made Adam like the world, and then God decides it's not good for the man to be alone. Genesis 2:18. Then the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him. I'm just going to say here, now a lot of people have used the word helper to say that women are like inferior, that they're just supposed to assist, they can't have any responsibility of their own. So I'm just going to explain what that word in Hebrew meant, because I think it changes the perspective on this. In English, the word help has like a broad range of connotations. It can refer to a simple, modest act or something more significant. An example of significant help is like a legal assistance or legal help with a lawyer or a doctor. But in Hebrew, the word for helper, used in Genesis 2:18 and 20, is Ezer, E-Z-E-R, and it is always and only used in the Old Testament in the context of vitally important and powerful assistance. The word Ezer is a combination of two roots, meaning to rescue and to save and strength. And Ezer is only used 21 times in the Old Testament. Twice it is used to refer to Eve. 3 times it's used to refer to nations that provided military assistance to Israel. And the other 16 times it's used in reference to God as a helper. So all of those verses are talking about a vital, powerful, rescuing kind of help. Yet when Ezer is applied to the first woman, Eve, its meaning has been diminished to fit with traditional and cultural roles of women. So. And Moses names one of his sons Eliezer, which in Hebrew means God is my helper. And the verse goes on to explain that Moses named his son Eliezer, not because God has done Moses' laundry, but because God has delivered Moses from Pharaoh's sword. So it was like a much more powerful thing than just like, you helped me out with some stuff, you're kind of a useful person. It's like a vitally important part of his life. So I just put that out. So back to the Bible, Genesis 2:21. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While the man slept, the Lord God took out one of the man's ribs and closed up the opening. Then the Lord God made a woman from one rib, and he brought her to the man. At last the man exclaimed, This one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman, because she was taken from man. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. So all was good in the garden, happy times together, a man and woman together, a happy marriage, the first marriage. Then the serpent comes into the garden and tells them to eat fruit. They eat fruit. The woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her, so she took and ate of it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. At that moment their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness, so they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. When the cool evening breezes were blowing, the man and his wife heard the Lord God calling to them in the garden, so they hid from the Lord God among the trees. And basically what happens next is that God finds out what they've done. Just try and make this a bit shorter because we're short on time. So he finds out what they've done, and then he punishes them, and he says to the woman, this is her curse, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. And to the man he said, since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, The ground is cursed because of you. All of your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you. Though you will eat of its grains, by the sweat of your brow you will have food to eat, until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. So the punishment, to put it into context of this talk, was that women would want things their own way and would struggle to be dominant over their husbands, and men would have to work really hard to look after their family and to provide. And this is when things kind of went wrong with marriage, right back here, because from then on it's quite hard to find a nice example. There are some throughout the Bible, but they're not prominent. So when we dive deeper into the Old Testament, we quickly discover that when marriage is mentioned, it's quite different to how we know of marriage now. Men had multiple wives and concubines who were slaves who were legally wives, but so they were of a lower status, like wife. One important, concubines less important, but still important. And women were considered property and could be purchased from their fathers with a dowry. And it took thousands of years for monogamy, a marriage between just two people, to become normal. The Romans of Jesus' time had a greater emphasis on monogamy than the Jews, and it's possible this influenced the early Christians. Paul, in his first letter to Timothy, tells the church leaders that they should only have one wife, to set the example to the church and its leaders that that's the way it was designed to be back in the Garden of Eden, and that's what they should be continuing. This is 1 Timothy 2, verse 3. But beyond the laws on monogamy, Romans saw marriage as a binding act, solely when a couple lived together and considered it marriage for themselves. So there was no wedding like we have now. And this was stuck with the church for a long time. So for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, marriage was mutual consent and sexy time. But in the 12th century, the Christian powers realised there was a problem with this, and because in Mary and Joseph and Jesus, they believed Mary was a virgin, but she's referred to as Joseph's wife. So they were like, well, if all you have to do to be married is have sex, then this isn't going to work. She can't be. We'll have to work out how that. So they changed the rules for marital requirements, basically. So you didn't even have to have sex to be married. You just needed people you could be like, I'm married to you, and that'd be like, we didn't even have to see each other. So it was like a marriage at convenience for people. They just claimed to be married by personal gain. Then it changed again. So basically, by 1215, is that how you say the year? 1215 sounds like a time. The three things, the religious council required three things for a valid marriage. You had to have a dowry, you had to have a ceremony at a church, and then that's when the bans that we get read now happen. So I found this quite interesting because I had no idea how this came to be the way it is now. But basically, it wasn't until the 18th century that love was a major consideration in marriage. For the majority of human history, love has not been an active part of marriage. In some cultures, it was even considered distasteful or psychotic. Marriage, for the most part, has been less about two people in love and more about the needs of a tribe or a family, whether it was tribal hunters, villagers, kings, or common city folk. If it happened before the 18th century, marriage was a means of survival, safety, comfort, or advantage, and it brought groups of people together into mutually beneficial relationships. And there's nothing wrong with that. But now we live in a time where survival isn't a day-to-day worry. We have systems set in place that have satiated the basic needs for most people in civilized nations. Marriage has changed as we have changed, and we just happen to be living in one of the most radically changing times in the history of human civilization. A historian called Kuntz writes, the relations between men and women have changed more in the past 30 years than they did in the previous 3,000. Naturally, changes between men and women mean changes in marriage. So, yes, now we deal with divorce rates, broken families, and controversial definitions of marriage. But what we have today, even with its flaws and failures, is beautiful and personal. Today's marriage is a relationship that is no longer tied to survival and safety. I think that the church is sometimes guilty of marriage being the ultimate thing for a young person to do. You grow up, you get baptized, and you do something at church, and then it's sort of this expectation that the next thing that you will do is get married, and it's almost like it becomes this super amazing thing that you have to do, and everyone's like, oh, are you still single? Have you found somebody yet? It's the be all and end all. And so, before I talk about how great it is, for anybody here who's like, but it is great and I really want it, I'm just going to talk about I've got three expectations that marriage will not meet for you. I just think the fantasy of marriage looks a lot different from reality. I think the most successful marriages start with a solid foundation, and that foundation is built up on many things: mutual interest, shared belief, shared relationship with God, selflessness, and of course love. But the biggest problem going into many marriages is that often those basics are held back by unrealistic expectations that you bring with you, whatever it is. All of us know somebody whose marriage didn't work out. We've all heard the statistics. First marriages have a failure rate of more than 40%, and second marriages end in divorce 60% of the time. And this is particularly true of a generation whose parents have been married and divorced. We think we know what marriage is like because you see it on TV. There's like Monica and Chandler, it's all candles and sex and witty banter and lots of jokes. And or like on One Tree Hill, there was dancing in the rain and kissing, and and any Nicholas Sparks movie, it's like everyone's just so in love, it's all amazing all the time, and that's what marriage must be like. Then, when anything doesn't turn out exactly as we dreamed it would be, we look for an out, blame it on irreconcilable differences, and scrap the covenant that we made with God. So, the differences aren't the problem though, our irreconcilable expectations are. So, let's look at some of these ideas and dump them. Basically, number one, marriage isn't a cure for loneliness. In a society where we're plugged in 24 hours a day, where community is more often used to describe Facebook friends than an actual neighbourhood, people long to connect intimately with somebody. We see couples everywhere, in restaurants, on TV, or the bus, the train, or on the way to work, and we feel like something is missing in our lives if we're alone. As humans, we have an innate need to belong, and we expect a spouse to provide that sense of acceptance and intimacy and comfort. With Jerry Maguire looking for someone who can say, "You complete me." Best case scenario, that's what a really awesome marriage would provide. But I know couples in loving relationships who remain lonely. Why? They found the perfect mate who was taking great strides towards fulfilling their need for intimacy. But that's a heavy load for one person to bear. You cannot be looking for a man or a woman to fill that need in you. Lonely single people become lonely married people. If your goal in marriage is to satisfy your need to belong, your next stop will be heartbreak. I know when John and I first married, although we were happy together, I was surprised that I still felt lonely. Despite the fact that we were together almost all of the time, I still felt lonely. It was an insane expectation to put on that other person that they complete all of me. Only God can do that, and through realising that and spending time with God, it's helped me to be less lonely. Deadly quiet. Oh no, it's terrible. Okay, number two, it's just going to get worse from here. Number two, it isn't a rowdy sex romp. I'm sorry. Sex's place is in marriage, as Pete talked about. And it's one of the perks. But it strikes me as kind of ironic that all you want to do when you're a couple and you're dating is push the "how far can we go" line to the limit. But when you get married, it quickly seems like that's not an issue anymore. Don't get me wrong, it's not like you get married and don't want to do that anymore. It's just in the space of one day, after one ceremony, it's suddenly okay to be naked with somebody that you've been trying not to be naked with for potentially years. It's kind of awkward, and it's not going to be like it is in the movies. I know lots of couples who've chosen not to have sex on their wedding night because they know that they would be too tired after such a big, important and long day. But what really happens when you get married is that life kicks back in. You work all day, you have commitments at church, you have things you need to get done, and there are jobs to do around the house, and life just gets in the way. You will be too tired, and you will genuinely have a headache. With communication and sensitivity, sex can and should remain a vital part of marriage. It's the ultimate bonding activity for a couple to share, and it's what God created marriage for. But remember, it's not the only activity. Don't expect marriage to be a 50-year honeymoon. And the third one, all your depressed faces. It isn't an easy transition. Okay. There's a reason romantic movies end with rather than begin with a wedding. It's because that's when that hard stuff starts. For anyone who's lived on their own for any length of time, the space between singleness and marriage is a wide one, and it's a difficult transition for many people. I wasn't ready for all the changes a friend of mine once told me about his first few months of marriage. I could deal with moving into her place and giving up my furniture. It was pretty much rubbish anyway. But what surprised me was having to deal with her emotions. When you're dating, you always see her best face. Once you get married, you see everything. Women don't have it any easier. Many secretly wince at the notion of placing their fate alongside that of another, worrying that if the role of wife might eat into their sense of individuality. I know I found it a bizarre thought when we got married that Rachel Dyer didn't exist anymore, and in a lot of ways I'm still adjusting to that. And it's hard when you're at church and people don't know you as who you are as an individual. Oh, you're John's wife. I know Lillian and I particularly get very frustrated by people who could just consider us one of the wives of John, Pete or Di, and seem to consider us interchangeable.
How many wives you got, Di?
I found the real.
It's having to find a new identity for yourself. But it's also the adjustment you make when two styles of family come together, and you have to work out what's going to work for you both. For example, my family make a huge deal when anyone leaves the house. You could be going out for 5 minutes, you could be going to post a letter in a letterbox and you'll be back. But it's, oh, where are you going? How long are you going to be? When are you going to be back? Have you got a coat? Have you got keys? And then it's like a big hug and a kiss and I love you and I'll see you soon. And then you go out the door and that's every time you leave. That's like, and when you come back in, it's hello, how was it? Did you have a nice time? Like you could have been gone for 2 minutes, I'm not exaggerating. Well, John and I had only been married a few months and one day he just walked out of the house.
Well done,
I panicked. I tried calling his mobile and I couldn't reach him. I tried contacting friends to see if he'd arranged to go out with them and he wasn't. And everyone was like, no, I haven't heard from John. Well, I was convinced he must have left me because he would just leave without saying where they're going. By the time John got back, I'm screaming and crying uncontrollably on the floor. And he said, wait, what's wrong? Kind of annoyed with me because he's got 10 missed calls and his friends keep ringing him, like, are you okay? Where have you gone? I was like, I'm screaming, where have you been? Why did you leave me? And he's like, I went to Tesco to get milk. His family doesn't tell anyone when they are leaving the house. They don't say hello when they are coming in. And they don't say goodbye. It's bizarre. But it took us a little while, and we worked out a system that works for us. Some happy medium between the two. But it requires a lot of effort, and it's not the kind of thing that you can plan for. You think that it has nothing to do with how much we love each other. It's just a different way of living. And when you get married, those things are sort of like amplified, and you can't understand why anyone would do it any differently because your way is the way. So I'm just gonna say, the head start by ending with this disclaimer. We've been discussing what marriage is not, but here's what marriage is. Marriage is wonderful. It's great to make it through life with a partner who loves you despite your morning breath, despite your stinky shoes, and despite your failure to clean up after yourself. Marriage is deeply satisfying, incredibly fulfilling, and lots of fun. It makes the harsh edges of life a little softer. It brings joy and hope and laughter, but it's not easy, and it's not something to rush into. And you want to get your expectations right, and then you'll love it. From preparing this talk and looking what the Bible has to say about marriage, although marriage is something God created, and He created it at the beginning, and that's what He planned for, like raising families, and that's what He created sex for, like within marriage. The scriptures actually tell us that it's a choice. It's not like a rite of Christian passage that you have to do in order to be accepted into the community. You don't have to. You're still important if you're not married, just as if you are married. And I'm just going to read what Paul has said on it because I found this comforting, because I didn't know what to say. So it's 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1. Now I will answer the questions you asked in your letter. You asked, is it best for people not to marry? Well, having your own husband or wife should keep you from doing something immoral. Husbands and wives should be fair with each other about having sex. A wife belongs to her husband instead of herself, and a husband belongs to his wife instead of to himself. So don't refuse sex to each other unless you agree not to have sex for a little while in order to spend time in prayer. Then Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. In my opinion, that is what should be done, though I don't know of anything the Lord said about this matter. And he goes on. My advice for the unmarried and for widows is that it is acceptable for them to remain single, just as I am. But if you don't have enough self-control, then go ahead and get married. After all, it's better to marry than burn with desire. I instruct married couples to stay together, and this is exactly what the Lord himself taught. I just found it incredibly comforting that, singleness is the ideal, and marriage is like, well, if you can't control yourself, you better get married. And I couldn't find, I was so inspired by God's talk about how singleness was a gift from God, and I was trying to be like, well, marriage must be a gift from God. No. Marriage is a choice that if you can't control your desire to have sex, if you don't think that singleness is going to work for you, then it's a perfectly okay choice. It's not like a bad thing, but it's not a gift from God. It's a blessing, but it's never called it a gift. Because I was going to say that it's the same sort of gift. Like, it's not easy when you have to work at it. So another reason why I thought marriage is special is because it symbolises the covenant between God and the church, because the church is referred to as the bride of Christ. And I think that's another reason why marriage is special. I just felt that, although we all know marriage is great, I don't know many single people that would, apart from the comment you've raised, like why in this day and age why would you want to get married? Well, as a Christian, as Pete said, sex is places in marriage, but if you are happy and able, then the point is that you don't have to. If you don't feel that that's for you, or the responsibility, because it is a responsibility, it's not like happy, clappy, good times all the time. It's hard work, and I think that you raise a valid point with your question, that it is a good thing, and it's a great thing, and it's a biblical thing, and if you want to have a family, that's the way God set it out to be. But the reason it's hard is because of the fall, and the reason it's attacked is because it symbolises the covenant between God and the church. So anything that is that important, then the enemy's going to try and get in the way of that.
Well, originally I was too lazy to get married, but that sounds good. So.
Well, that's if you just want to break into groups. I don't know how much time we have left. No time. I've gone over time. If when you're at the pub you want to talk about it, or if you have any questions, feel free to come and ask. Because I realise it was a bit of it's not. I hope it didn't come across anti-marriage, because I'm not at all. I'm very happy. I just feel like sometimes marriage is great, and we all think it is, and I think sometimes that's the problem when you go into marriage and you think it's going to be amazing, and I don't think the realities of it are actually talked